We have talked about anger and sadness on previous retreats. And we have talked about fear on this one as a fundamental energy that underlies the existence of the ego and covers and tries to protect you from seeing more of yourself and accepting more of the world for what it is and experiencing your own discomfort and pain. And today, I'm going to talk about guilt. Guilt and shame. It sucks to feel guilty, doesn't it? So what is it? What are we actually experiencing when we feel guilt? Guilt is what you experience when you realize that you have moved against yourself, that you have moved against your heart, that you have wronged someone, that you have done something that you shouldn't have done. It can be said with a certain degree of accuracy as a combination of anger and sadness. It's remorse. So you're sad for the person you have wronged because they didn't deserve it. And you're angry at yourself for having done it. It is fundamentally different from shame. The difference is shame always includes the other in its evaluation. Shame is not about you realizing that you have done something wrong. Shame is about you realizing or perceiving or understanding that other people think that you have done something wrong. And expecting a form of punishment. Guilt is something else. There might not be a single person in the world who would judge you for what you've done, or all of your circle might tell you that you've done the right thing. But still you know. And so you're feeling guilt. It does not require anyone else to validate it. It does not require anyone else to threaten you with consequence. The consequence is guilt itself. And so it is no wonder that in this perverted world in which everything is upside down, most people cannot tell the difference between guilt and shame. They feel the same, oftentimes. For example, there is a term, toxic guilt. There's a book I even read myself a long time ago, Escaping Toxic Guilt or something like that. They're talking about people who are in abusive relationships that they cannot leave because they feel guilty. So they call it toxic. They're right to call it toxic, but it's not guilt that they talk about, it's shame. They're afraid to leave because they are under a false sense of obligation that is imposed on these people by others. Oh, I have to stay in this abusive relationship, otherwise I'm not a good wife or a husband or a mother. Oh, this abusive person needs my help, so I must tolerate the abuse, otherwise I'm not a good person. There's thoughts that you have to tolerate, otherwise you're bad, are not yours, they're given you by the other. So they're talking about shame. But most people cannot tell the difference because it feels very much the same oftentimes. Only quite, in my experience, only quite deep on the spiritual journey, when you have already begun to honestly investigate all of the mistreatments that you have incurred upon other people, the difference becomes clear. Which is not to say that they cannot be differentiated at all. They can, and I'll try to help you. I am trying to help you by giving you this pointer. But it can be difficult. So it is for the same reason there is a saying which is very true. I don't remember where I read it. I think it was a quite good psychiatrist that wrote it, even though his blog is anonymous. He said, narcissists do not experience guilt, only shame. So narcissists are so separated from their own hearts and from their own right and wrong, which is in every human heart, that they mostly evaluate the badness or goodness of their behavior by other people. So if no one tells them that it was wretched, they are okay. But then if they begin to be the subject of humiliation or someone calls them out of it, they feel pain. That's shame. So if someone like that embarks on the spiritual path, they will feel guilt eventually. After going through layers of shame, they will also start realizing all the ways in which they have moved against their own hearts, and they will begin to experience guilt. So just like oftentimes I'm asked the question, well, how do you know if what I want is what I really want, or it is conditioned? So oftentimes say, imagine that this thing you want to do, you will do, but you don't get to tell anybody. You're not going to brag to your friends. You're not going to post it on Facebook. You will help this person or make something. Or go have fun in the way that you like. You know, biking, fishing, whatever. But you don't get to tell anyone that. Will you still do it? And the answer is yes. Then it's most likely coming from your heart. It's most likely coming from you. That's an interesting question for most people to contemplate. Would I still be engaged in whatever it is I am engaged in if I never got to receive approval and validation from other people? So something similar can happen here. If you're struggling to understand if it's guilt or shame, and it's not very important actually, from the perspective of feeling it, both must be felt, both must be allowed. Feeling both leads to deeper truth and deeper opening of the heart. You will not avoid either. But sooner or later you will see that they are different. And only one is instructive. The difference is not important on the level of feeling. But for example, if you apologize out of shame, you're not doing anyone any favors. The only true apology is an apology out of guilt. Because a true apology includes authentic remorse, not fear. If you apologize out of shame, you're apologizing out of fear of consequence. I'm sorry, don't punish me, I won't do that again. If you apologize out of guilt, you're saying, I'm sorry I have done this to you, I shouldn't have. That's a very different kind of apology. And most apologies in our society, actually, if you look closely, are the first kind of apology. Abused apologize to the abusers. Powerless apologize to the powerful. Most apologies in our society are pleads for mercy. A plead for mercy is not an apology. In order to issue a true apology, it has to be about you and your behavior. So in truth, only powerful can apologize. Powerless and abused cannot apologize, but we make them. And those in power, whether it's social power, the power in relationships, the political power, almost never apologize. So realizing that you have done something wrong, owning it, and changing your behavior implies a certain amount of power. Power over your own behavior, power over yourself, self-awareness, self-possession. That's the power that is connected to an authentic apology. So it can be important to know if you're feeling guilt or shame, even though you'll need to feel both. It's not very important with regards to whether to allow this experience in your consciousness. And so similarly to the example I gave before, ask yourself, if no one knew that you have done it, and no one could possibly know, ever, or if you tell them, they wouldn't judge you, ever. If there was no risk at all of someone disapproving of you after having learned that you have done something, if everyone would cheer you, or at the very least be indifferent to it, would you still feel shitty about it? If the answer is yes, then most likely it's guilt. But it can be very confusing in the dream state, because you see, in the dream state, you oftentimes feel shitty, not because of other people in actuality, but because of other people in your head. So it can be very difficult to differentiate, because you can say, well, okay, yes, no one knows, but the voices in my head keep telling me that it was wrong, that it was wrong, that it was wrong. Well, if they are the only source of this knowledge, this information, so to speak, that it was wrong, and they're harsh to you, it is a society. It's just a virtual society in your head. So it can be confusing. That's why I always advocate to feel both guilt and shame. And the more you are familiar with those sensations, the more you will start noticing that they feel very differently. Because when you're shamed, whether by real people or by a virtual society in your head, there's a pain there, of course. There's a pain and fear, and the mind can be very harsh. But it is very different from when you truly have done something wrong. For example, when you're shamed by the virtual society in your head, you very rarely feel authentic sadness, authentic grief for another person. You kind of don't care much about another person. What you care about, oh, I am a shitty person, I'm bad, I should have done this, I should have done this. But you don't cry for another person for having experienced your mistreatment. As I said in my previous talk, anger and sadness are both reactions to mistreatment. Anger is a outwardly facing one, to punish the source of mistreatment, and sadness is inwardly facing one, to soothe. Sadness is a soothing movement. So when you're experiencing authentic guilt, it's a mix of the two, but in a peculiar direction. You feel anger towards yourself, and you feel sadness for another person. And when you're processing the mistreatments that have been done to you, it is the opposite. You feel anger towards another person, and you feel sadness for yourself. And it is good when it comes. Why? It's very simple. Because you cannot stop any behavior which you're still unconscious of. You cannot let go of anything you're still in denial of. So if you're experiencing guilt, authentic guilt, it means that some parts of you that led you to mistreat others are becoming open now. are becoming visible now. And that's good news. Because the ways in which you mistreat others are also the ways in which you mistreat yourself. Whatever you disallow the other, you also disallow yourself. Whatever you abuse the other for, you will also abuse yourself for, or allow other people to abuse you for. You may say, how do I forgive myself? Well, the question of forgiveness is obvious, really, because if you have experienced guilt for something that you have done in the past, that means now this version of you knows better. If it didn't know better, you wouldn't feel guilty. You would remain in ignorance. So now you know that it was wrong, that you shouldn't have done that. You'll try better next time. In this similar situation, you will not repeat the same mistake. But what does it also mean? So at the same time, it means that this older you did not. They did it without realizing it. They did it unknowingly, unconsciously. So the question of forgiveness does not even arise. You are already forgiven. How can you be punished for what you didn't know? So the only thing that is needed to be done, that is left to do, is to feel and grieve. And let this feeling, let this sensation enter you. And give it your love. And cry your tears. Be angry if you have to. If it comes. Not if you have to. And it will come. And it's the same thing with other people who mistreat you. Just the opposite. Different directions of sadness and anger, but the same phenomenon. So shame is always connected with fear. Guilt isn't. There may be fear of experiencing guilt itself, or there may be fear of anger and sadness, but fundamentally guilt is about opening your heart, it's not about fear. Whereas shame is always about fear of the other, fear of punishment. And the deeper you go on the spiritual path, the more obvious the distinction it will be. And the more you will see that guilt is actually quite rare in our society. Authentic remorse is quite rare in our society. That's why authentic apology with tears in one's eyes is quite rare in our society. But shame is ubiquitous. And it's a tremendous controlling force. So this concludes my talk about guilt. I have run out of things to say. And if you have any questions, I will be happy to take them.
You said that usually with guilt, if you're guilty about something that you did to someone else, you'll feel angry towards yourself, but sad for them. And I've noticed I've had more anger and rage lately, but whenever I look back at some of the things that I did, like to my brother, for example, he was getting into psychedelics and I was telling on him basically to my parents, because I was also worried about his health, but I also wanted to look like the straight edge, like the good boy in the house, the one that's not getting into trouble and messing his life up. And I feel really guilty about that because he was just alone, and he didn't have any support into exploring that stuff. And now I'm doing it, and now he's very numb and aggressive, and he's hurt. But I don't feel, I've noticed I don't feel like anger toward myself as much as I feel just general, like not general, but deep sadness for him, but also just because I did that. The question I was going to ask is, why don't I feel as much anger as I should in that context?
I thought you started your question with saying that you've been feeling a lot of anger and rage recently.
I have just different situations, different things.
Okay. I understand. So that's actually an interesting example of something that you did out of shame. That you did something wrong out of shame. You said, I wanted to be a good boy, and so that's a behavior out of shame and fear that led to an actually wrong behavior that led to guilt. So shame actually can lead to doing things for which we later will feel guilty for. Guilt does not lead to shame. For example, even in the escaping toxic shame, escaping toxic guilt, when you're in an abusive relationship with someone, you are living against yourself, and you might later experience guilt towards your old self, towards your prior self. So they are kind of fundamentally different. The importance to differentiate between the two is that acting on guilt as an apology or making things right is good, but acting on shame never is. Acting on shame usually makes things worse. So more to the core of your question, guilt is a complex emotion, right? So if you say, I know I'm guilty, but what I'm actually feeling is sadness, there is such an emotion as guilt. It's like an emotion. Guilt as an emotion, as a sensual experience, is different from sadness. Like, for example, if you take a very intense version of it, right? When people feel really guilty, and then when people are grieving for someone who passed away, for example, they look quite different. Like, people who feel very guilty usually don't cry. So, and the face looks different too. So guilt is a composite emotion. Guilt is actually a combination of anger and sadness. That's why it feels differently from both anger and sadness. The deeper you go in the spiritual path, the more you kind of start to unpack all of it. So the composite emotion kind of break apart. That's why I can that's why I can even say such a thing, because I saw it in my own experience. Right, and so you start seeing much clearer. This is anger, this is sadness, this is grief. So there are like in a kind of basic. Well, grief and sadness is the same thing. So there are basic emotions. So the fear is the center of it all. It saturates all, and there are basic emotions. Anger and sadness. Anger, sadness. probably they're the most basic ones. The composite ones are almost all combinations of them, like disgust, envy, jealousy. Those are combination of fear and the basic emotions. So guilt is a combination of anger and sadness. What I'm hearing you saying to me is not like I feel guilty, right? What you're saying, I feel sad, and my mind is telling me that I'm guilty. Yes, you were guilty, but you're experiencing sadness. If you were actually feeling guilt, you wouldn't say I'm feeling sad. All I can feel is sad. You would say I'm feeling guilt. You see, try to remember something in your past for which you felt guilty, like the feeling of guilt itself. It's different from sadness, isn't it? It's more complex. It has a different flavor. Isn't that right?
I don't know.
You don't know.
I think
Have you ever felt
trouble remembering guilt?
Uh-huh. Okay, I see. So guilt has this element. So you see. So the difference between this. So sadness is a kind of a pure in this way. So sadness is a response to something that happened. Guilt has this element of not just something that happened. You know, something can happen, like that is completely out of your hands. Like someone might die because a lightning struck them, and you will cry, right? So it's a reaction to something that happened. Guilt has a component of, oh, I was a part of it. I made it happen. I shouldn't have done it. There's a self-blame there. I shouldn't have done it. I should. So it's a component. So on one hand, something had happened, and the other part of it, I shouldn't have done it because I made it happen or I helped it happen. Yeah. That's the anger towards yourself. That's the component of it. So when they come together at the same time, then we feel a composite emotion that we call guilt, right? So if only sadness comes, oh, it happened, and I'm sad about it. If there's no like self-blame, self-loathing, I shouldn't have done it, then it's just experienced as sadness. So in some way, as all of this unravel, you actually start. First, you start differentiating between guilt and shame. Then you actually start seeing that guilt is also composite. So, like first, it can come, for example, in meditation or on a psychedelic trip. It can come as first, let's say, anger. I shouldn't have done it. Then tears for the other person, or the other way around. First, like tears, and then anger. I shouldn't have done it. So they actually might start coming separated in time. It's when they come at the same time, it is experienced as guilt.
Is it possible to experience sadness for the I shouldn't have done it part instead of anger? Because I'd say that's what I've been feeling.
Well, I guess, but you're still grieving for the other person, not for yourself, right? So it's still sadness that is directed towards another person. So it's okay. It's there's basically a distinction that I'm discussing here between the description of the emotion experience or an idea or insight or anything at all, which is mostly serves the purpose of communication, and the actual sensory experience that is happening. So when you say, I feel guilty, but I feel only sadness, what you mean is that I feel guilty is the communication of the part that I shouldn't have done it, but the actual sensory experience is sadness. That's completely fine. In my talk, when I was talking about guilt, I was talking about guilt as a sensory experience, which later kind of disassembles into anger and sadness. You see, but when it comes together, so who here has experienced guilt as a sensory experience, as a feeling, which is distinct from sadness and anger? So most, and me too, right? But sooner or later, it's actually seen to be composite. It's just like shame, right? So shame always have a component of fear, but it's very difficult to see. You see, it's like when we're shamed, when we're humiliated, we just feel pain, right? It is much later in self-investigation, the journey, that we see that actually shame is the pain of abandonment, the pain of rejection, combined with the fear of punishment, the fear of disapproval. You see, so shame has, and of course, every rejection is also self-rejection. So the composite, complex sensory feelings are a combination of more basic, more fundamental ones. So if you question or doubting, like, am I doing something wrong? Is there something wrong in my practice that, what, my mind is telling me I'm guilty, but I'm only feeling sadness? Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Thank you.
Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm. I'm a little scared that I haven't felt much guilt. I'm wondering if it's a hint of narcissism, like you had said. You said narcissist.
We'll see. Because there are only two options here. Is that you either at the stage where it kind of disassembled into anger and sadness, or there is much more self-loathing and self-hatred and anger in you for the things that you have done, which have not yet been accessed. And there will be moments where they arise together, and you will experience it. You will experience it as guilt. So, but you see, I can also answer you very generally, which is also a scary answer for most people, that whatever you're afraid of, you will experience. So if you're a little scared that the emotion of guilt will be very painful, then most likely you will experience much more guilt, yes. Because whatever we're scared of on the level of sensory experiences, whatever is still hidden in our unconscious. Maybe it's kind of easy for you to cry tears for other people and for yourself, and it feels cleansing. But when the real opening of the heart and the real transformation of your behavior starts happening, then it's going to be in somewhat more intense and more unpleasant thing. But you already said that you have recently started feeling anger, or you have never felt anger towards yourself, only towards other people.
I'm not sure.
We'll see. Don't be scared. I mean, be scared, but whatever you're scared of will be good for you.
Yeah. Okay.
Something you said
Mm.
Pleading for mercy. It just struck me so hard. So much of the behavior I engage in is pleading for mercy. And so much of what underlines a lot of my feelings is that. And I was thinking about how I've noticed recently that I'm a lot more interested in people. I care about them a lot more. I notice their feelings. I'm more comfortable being around them. But there's this also thing that kind of piggybacks on top of it, or is like a parasitic kind of element to it, which is this sense of pleading for mercy, right? I think a lot of what we get taught in spirituality is to approach our loving kindness in that way. It's hard to discern the part of it that it's genuine and the part of it that's false.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, yes. And in spirituality, we are often much taught to fake loving kindness.
Yeah, and to, even if there's a genuine element to it, to do it in a way that is a form of slavery.
Yes.
And I was thinking about what you were saying about like guilt and shame, because I mean, I'm not good with labeling feelings a lot of the time, but for the longest time, I've been labeling what I felt towards other people as guilt. It almost seems like it's a co-opted.
It was probably shame.
Yeah, except the few times that I felt something that really felt like shame felt deeper and more painful. And so what I normally feel is the kind of like the not very aware form of shame, right?
Probably
That
most
I
likely.
call guilt.
Most people most people call a huge percentage of a huge portion of their shame guilt.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm used to having emotions kind of deconstruct and flip and do all of the things that they do as you become more aware of them. It's just this is a harder one for me that I don't have as much insight about most of the time. But I did notice that this feeling that somehow I am hurting other people by doing the thing that I want to do, and that I have to constantly correct for that
That's
by
shame.
putting them first.
Yeah, for sure.
It's sick.
Yes.
And that constant activity creates a sense of obligation always.
That's right.
And the obligation is exhausting.
Yes.
And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that sense of obligation and responsibility that get tied to shame, because I know I feel it, and I know many of us do, and it's one of those things where I feel like I've gotten so far in my progress, and yet this still consumes me in such a big way. And even as I get closer, like I said, to feeling loving kindness towards other people, the loving kindness towards myself is harder.
Oh yes, because the loving kindness towards yourself is actually the authentic one. The loving kindness towards other people cannot be anything but its reflection.
Yeah.
You cannot be more kind to anyone than you are kind to yourself. You can fake being more kind. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of spirituality teaches us. So you see, the interesting part about the spiritual society, and it's still a society, but it's structured around different things. So it is just as fake, deceitful, and inauthentic as a society. It's just that this society is structured around success and pretending to be successful. So in the general society, the mainstream society, equates success with happiness. And so people put a lot of energy into pretending that they're successful with money, with other genders, with family, with anything at all, with their physique, with anything. And since the belief, the mantra that saturates the general society is happiness equates success, then they put also a lot of energy into maintaining the image that they are happy. So they smile all the time, they try to maintain energetic disposition, they put pictures on Facebook showing like, oh, we've had this wonderful brunch, and oh, look at my new car, and like, you know, I'm happy with my wife, and things like that. So the spiritual society is generally speaking the same. They just have a very, very different set of values. So they equate happiness with kindness and unconditional love. And so they try to also, of course, there's also boasting about how happy one is. That's the same, but instead of boasting about happiness in the context of success, they're boasting about happiness in the context of unconditional love and kindness. And so they're boasting about how kind one is. So just like people try to emulate success and putting a front image, not the substance, but the image of their success, people in the spiritual world try to put up an image of kindness, an image. So they will smile inauthentically, even when they don't want to smile. They will try to treat you kindly, even if they don't want to treat you kindly. Or they will try to like make it seem like it's kind, only appear to be kind. Like, you know, like, oh, I love you so much, I have no goodwill towards you, but could you please go? You know, there are things like that. So where it's kind of someone who isn't aware what's actually going on and cannot see rejection can get easily duped. Because, you know, when words, it's all very nice. You know, oh, you need to like do this, this, and this so for your own good. But in reality, you can see, you know, I just don't want to see you, I don't like you. And this can all be said with a smile. You see, so because whatever the ego is getting approved for, it will also try to fake. It will try to emulate. And if the ego is getting approved for the signs of kindness or unconditional love, or for smiles, or for display of good willingness, because you cannot be approved for true good willingness, because true good willingness requires no one's approval, right? You can only be approved for signs of good willingness. Then the ego will start putting out signs of good willingness, signs of kindness, signs of equanimity, same thing. So every spiritual society is sick with that, without exception, just like every general society is sick with the other stuff. So just like the general society will encourage you to pretend to be more successful than you are, subtly or not so subtly. I mean, even if it doesn't encourage directly, your ego will be encouraged to do that because it gets approval for it. The spiritual society will also encourage you to be more loving and kind than you really are.
Yeah. The thing about
to behave, not to be,
mercy
to behave. Yeah.
is that somebody has to be a threat.
Yes.
You're telling the other person, no, it's okay, you're the threat, and I'm the one that is less powerful than you, and it's okay, But I feel like the very reason why I have to say that is because I feel like I'm the threat. What am I a threat to?
You'll have to be more specific a little bit. Can you give me an example?
Well, like I feel like if you're constantly self-effacing
Mm-hmm.
and you're putting yourself down for other people
Mm-hmm.
in some way, serving them or just kind of, however it is that you act.
Oh, I see.
Then you're telling them that I'm weaker than you and you could hurt me, and I am showing you that I'm safe so that you won't hurt me. But in reality, I feel like the reason why I'm doing it is because I could hurt them. And I'm afraid to hurt them. And I take on that posture of being subservient because I don't want people to see me as a threat, because that would make me a threat somehow. to myself. I feel like this comes back to some weird thing with my dad as a kid, where like he couldn't handle anybody having their own sense of themselves, and he had to crush it out of people. And if I acted on my own volition, that somehow I was a threat to him. And all I do now is try to prove to everyone else that I'm not a threat by acting like they're one. And then by somehow using that as a way of forcing myself to be kind to them constantly and serve them. It just seems incredibly sick. Anyway, sorry, that's a
No. That was
insight.
actually, that's a beautiful reflection. Yeah, please continue. Yeah,
I think that's
great.
about it. It just kind of, yeah, it just seems really fucked up.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah. So you kind of preemptively apologize.
Yeah.
It's almost as if you apologize for your own existence.
Almost as if. Like totally
Yeah.
as if.
Yeah. So I think that this is the case. So to tie it to what I was saying, if you have a question about that, when I said abused apologize to the abusers, right? So it doesn't mean that you are that all those people that you're preemptively apologizing to are threats to you or abusive to you, but the habit to be in this position is so ingrained that you basically
Turn everyone into an abuser.
yeah.
That's the irony.
Yeah. To whom you need to apologize preemptively, so that they aren't harsh to you. And of course, in your mind, you would also be very harsh to them. You would hate them for it. Somewhere, yeah. It's actually very good that you're saying it.
I think my parents, especially my father, he has a lot of shame, or you could call it guilt, but he's almost proud of his sense of duty and his sense of, like, he often brags, like, if I tell somebody that, I'm gonna be there at 5 and I show up at 5:05, I feel shame about it, and it's almost like masochistic, but that's his whole personality. And I think when I was growing up, he used guilt, or you might call it shame, to get me to be obedient. And it worked. Like, he was never physically violent or anything, but it works. I don't know. Like, I have a weird relationship with authority figures.
Yeah.
With my bosses at work, I'm always afraid of them. Like, it's not really like. I realized recently, like, the way that other people deal with their bosses is just, like a practical kind of arrangement where the more experienced person is in charge. But I regard my bosses and like my team lead or something almost as somebody who could, like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, I'm almost afraid of them, afraid of their judgment or any criticism they could give of me. And I can't really be natural or friendly with them because I'm
Yeah, of course.
afraid. And I think that comes from my problem with, or like the way my dad raised me.
Yes.
And then sometimes I just feel guilt for no reason. Like, when I'm by myself, I feel guilt as well. So it's kind of like what you said. I feel anger. Like, the guilt gives way to anger, like rage. But
but like I don't know. But recently I've started to like I feel like recently I've been getting less angry at my parents
Good.
because they have like they had a really bad relationship. But recently it started to get like I get really angry, but then part of me catches myself and I think, oh well, they just tried their best, and a lot of the things that they did to me that I was really hung up about weren't actually that bad, like objectively. It's more how it affected me on the
Yeah,
inside.
but it still hurts you deeply. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but I've tried to like blame them less now because it's like I feel like a bit less of a victim now, because
Good.
for the longest time I had this big victim feeling about the whole thing. But yeah, that's kind of my relationship with guilt. I'm trying to get fixed my relationship with like authority figures, especially like at work and things like that. Yeah, and to just like be able to interact with people more naturally.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jack, for this beautiful reflection. You said a lot of very good things. So fundamentally on the spiritual path, all anger and sadness dissolve, and the fact that you blame your parents less than before is actually a reflection, a consequence of you working through through parts of your rage, through parts of your fear, through parts of your sadness. So the more painful the experience is, the more pain there is in the body or in consciousness, the more blaming the mind is. And then some minds blame everyone else, some minds blame themselves, and often there's a combination of the two, and we get to experience both. So it's a natural progression that the more we process these suppressed emotions, the less blamey we become, because actually it's also very apparent that just like you did not choose your childhood, they didn't choose their childhood either. They are who they are just because they were formed in the same way. And in some way you are lucky, because even though you were formed the same way, somehow you stumbled upon spiritual awakening, and you can start to deconstructing all of it and stopping this cycle from generation to generation of passing all of this junk. So but it's useless, for someone who is going through a lot of rage or through a lot of anger, through a lot of fear, just to say that, but yeah, but your parents also, it's not their fault. It's kind of useless, and it's even abusive in some way, because it invalidates their own feelings. It's not possible to feel anger and rage without also these narratives of blame. So my advice to everyone who might be listening is that allow the narrative of blames and focus on accepting the sensory experience of anger and rage. And those narratives of blame, just like in Jack's case, will naturally and slowly start dissolving as more understanding, as you allow this suffering and you explore this suffering, the understanding naturally dawns that your parents must have suffered the same way, or even more. Usually more. I mean, usually parents leave their children. I mean, parents pass a big chunk of suffering to their children, but they usually try to do it a little less. Like most parents try to treat their children, not all of them, but the vast majority of them, try to treat their children better than they were themselves were treated. And usually they treat better, not by much, but to the extent of their ability, basically. So most parents pass a little bit less suffering to their children, but because the amount of suffering is so extreme in the human society, then this process is very, very, very slow. So that's why as a society we kind of become better, but very, very, very slowly. So in most cases, however bad your parents are, they themselves suffered probably more than you. in most cases. But this understanding, again, it dawns naturally as you open up to and give love and attention to your own suffering. It's useless to use this understanding to say, well, I feel rage towards my parents, therefore I am wrong. Therefore it is a wrong thing to feel because, they did their best and things like that. This just is a trick of suppression. So allow this rage, allow this anger, let this understanding come naturally to you. Make it yours. And this applies to anything else, right? Whatever I say, if I just say something and you say, okay, well, this sounds very right, this sounds very smart, so let me just adopt it as a kind of an idea, and then this is always bad, because if you adopt anything as an idea, it stunts your own growth. So approach it as am I seeing it in my own consciousness? Approach everything I say as a pointer, right? So if I say something, it's simply a pointer, right? If it's obvious to you, then great. But if it's coming, if you look at it as an idea that is coming from you, that sounds smart or sounds true, but you cannot say that it's obvious in your own experience, it's a pointer that your spiritual work must continue until this idea becomes yours, until it's possible. Well, not the idea, but an obvious truth. Until you start seeing this with the same clarity. So all of those things are pointers. I kind of pointing to a specific thing that is still in front of you. But you need to approach this knowledge yourselves, not borrow. So all borrowed knowledge leads to more pretense. That's also, by the way, why the spiritual societies are oftentimes look even uglier than the mainstream ones, because at least they're not trying to pretend, and they have a lot of borrowed knowledge from all the books, and they're trying to pretend that they understand all this, and they're trying to behave in a way, but underneath it all, it's all the same, bitterness and anger and jealousy and all of this stuff. So then you also said about obligation as self-punishment. Yes, so it's an internalized obligation, basically. And this ties to Shay's question, how it ties to shame. The shame and obligation is basically the same. They deeply connected. So shame is a fear of punishment, but for what? So shame is a fear of punishment for unfulfilled obligation, right? For an unfulfilled expectation, Like we expect you to always sit still at a dinner table. I'm talking about a small child, or never expose your genitalia. That's an obligation and an expectation that we placed on you because we're uncomfortable with it, but we don't know this, we're not aware of it, so we're placing this on you. And so when you do that, we're going to punish you for not meeting our expectations. And then sooner or later, you do this long enough, and then the fear of punishment becomes so strong that you don't even need to punish. You just can look at with, disapproval. I mean, because at first, a child that does something innocent but disapproved by the parents for the first time, when the parents just look at them disapprovingly, it's not okay, they might register it, but it's not in itself enough to develop it into a serious pain, right? If the child is not afraid of their parents already, and then every sign of disapproval is scary because what follows the disapproval is some actual punishment, right? But if the child isn't afraid of you, and I look at him funny, if it's a healthy child, he would be like, well, why are you looking at me like that? Nothing, right? So you have to actually punish the child, raise your voice, threaten to become violent, take their hand, put them into a corner, something like this, for the fear to actually start developing. And around this fear, the shame as the weapon of control starts developing. So shame and obligations are kind of the same. The more internalized obligation you have, the more shame you will experience on the spiritual path, as these internalized obligations are dropped, because they are there in the first place because they were instilled by fear. And so it's no wonder, right? So the more also internalized obligations you have, the more harsh you would be towards yourself, right? So it's no wonder that your father was not only instilled obligations towards you, which led you to a very unhealthy relationship with authority, to the fear of authority, but he was also punishing himself, and he was harsh towards himself for not fulfilling this obligation. And pride is very much connected to it too, because pride, like, how do you explain this all, right? How do you explain this whole insanity, right? Pride is a justification. Pride. So just like all shame is false shame, all pride is false pride, right? This is literally insanity, but you need to explain it to yourself, why you punish yourself, why you punish your child, why you're so harsh and demanding. So in order to explain it to yourself, you have to take pride in it. You have to say, this is a better way to live. This makes me a better person than others. Look at others. They always late, they unreliable, they this, and I am never. I have this discipline. I have this strength of character. So pride arises as a justification of why it must be this way. And so pride is actually always very violent. The proud people are the most dangerous people. The more a person is proud, the more damaging he potentially is, or she.
Thank you.
No, thank you. It was wonderful to hear this update from you. It's good. That's good. You also said that you want. You said very aptly that the correct relationship to authority is that, like, this is just a person who knows more than me. The only true hierarchy is the hierarchy of competence. All other hierarchies are false hierarchies. And the healthy mind, it's not even a hierarchy, it's just an acknowledgement, right? A healthy mind understands competence instantly. It's again only our pride or insecurity that prevents us from acknowledging someone else's competence, right? So the healthy position of a leader is just someone who is more experienced, have more confidence. Therefore, their arguments or their directions are more likely to be true. It does not mean they're always true, but it's just they're more likely to be true. It doesn't mean they're never wrong, but just due to their experience, they're less likely to be wrong. That's a healthy approach to authority of any kind, be it myself, by the way, in your relationship with me, or professor of physics, or any sort of leaders. But that's not how the ego pictures authority. The ego always pictures authority in the language of status, obedience, fear, power, and things like that. And so it takes actually a very healthy person. Those are rare, but it takes a very healthy person, or at least a person very self-confident in their own authority, to only view the boss as someone who has more experience in their position, like, for example, leading an organizing group of people working together, than this person. And that's the only reason why you should listen to your boss, right? It takes a very healthy mind to do that in a kind of a very pure way. But the more you do that, the more natural. I mean, the more you do the spiritual work, the more you will see this unhealthy relationship to authority, which is always either obedience or rebellion. So it's always either fear or fuck you. It's always either, okay, I'm going to succumb to you, or I'm going to try to overpower you, because the ego cannot see anyone as equal. It always must be below or above. And so this unhealthy component of the authority, of your relationship to authority, it gets exposed through continued exposition and feeling of suppressed emotion, is going to diminish. And the more healthy, like you said, just a natural, he's just a human being who maybe knows more than me in the particular area, it's going to slowly become more and more visible. So it will be kind of a process of elimination of the insecurity and opening up of the more natural way to relate to. Because you see, kind of even if you see a lot of people that appear to kind of naturally relate to authority in this way and don't have a lot of fear around their boss and stuff like that, you don't know what's going on in their minds. People are extremely well at pretending. I mean, I once say, enlightenment is basically a normality, actually. It's a sane human mind. But the problem with this society is that almost everyone pretends to be normal. So it's like, an example, like, your boss had an angry outburst with you or was rude to you, right? So an enlightened mind is not touched by this at all, so it's not disturbed at all. So, okay, so maybe he's having a bad day, whatever, you say, well, all right, okay, well, thank you, we'll talk another day, right? But then you take a person who is greatly affected by it. Like, do you think he's gonna stand up and scream in front of everyone, like, who do you think you are? Why are you speaking to me this way? Who gave you the right? No, of course not. He will do exactly what kind of the most rational, wanted response everyone is expected. So he will do something similar. He will say, like, okay, well, have a good day. We'll talk about it later, something like that. So to the extent of his ability. So everyone will try to pretend. So everyone like pretends to be normal. And then he's gonna go home and like be, what the fuck? We'll talk to his wife. Like, who do you think he is? Like he was rude to me in front of everyone. Maybe I should quit or things like that. But it's not gonna make a scene. It's not gonna make a dramatic scene. He's not gonna show the contents of his mind to all of the colleagues, right? Even though something quite similar is going on in the mind. So for it to really flow effortlessly and genuinely, it takes a lot of practice. So the problem, one of the tragedy of the society is that everyone pretends. Everyone pretends to be normal. Everyone pretends not to be like really affected. I once said, it's easy to pretend that you kind of okay, and it's easy not to pretend, meaning like when you're enlightened and you worked through most of your trauma and suppressed emotion, when it doesn't touch you, then it's easy. But in the middle, it's very difficult. So when you only stop learning to stop pretending and all of these pains become exposed, but everyone else is pretending, and it's very difficult for you to pretend. You feel pain much more acutely, and you don't want to pretend because it feels inauthentic, and you want to like tell him back something and really say what you think about it. In the middle, it's very difficult.
You were talking about shame and like apologizing out of shame, and I feel like I've done that. Like I did that like all the time, and even like within the last 3 days, and like I was never fucking sorry. Like I was never sorry. I was just apologizing, and I felt actually like I was just more angry that there was some type of obligation that I was supposed to apologize, but then I made that obligation too, like in my head.
Yeah.
And I guess like now I'm just like, what if I become an asshole, like, or what if I sound like a jerk because I don't want to apologize all the time? Like,
so do you apologize in this last few days? Did you apologize because you know that the other person expects it of you, or that because you expect it of yourself? So these obligations, in other words, are they actually visible in the actual reality? Can you observe other people expecting it of you, or are they very visible in your mind, but in reality you never even tried not to apologizing in these situations, you're just scared?
I think the second, like,
Me too.
I don't think they're like expecting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
me too. So try not to apologize in these situations, and then see how your minds react.
It's uncomfortable.
Yes. Yes. Yes, feel the fear and do it anyway. Because what you're mostly afraid of, unless you miscalculated something seriously, what you're mostly afraid of is not the reaction of another person, but it's the reaction of your mind. Because the familiar is going to say, oh, you're such an asshole. No one even told you that you're an asshole. You're telling it to yourself. You're such an asshole. You should apologize. Bad, bad, bad. The interesting thing is how deceitful the mind is. It's just crazy. People who are actually quite decent people and don't do much things wrong, their minds are like constantly telling them how bad they are. And the people who actually oftentimes do a lot of shitty things, the mind is telling them how good they are, how better than anyone else, because they need the justification for what they do. So almost anything that your mind is telling you about yourself, the vast majority of it is just bullshit, right? So if your mind is used to telling you that you're an asshole, you're probably quite a normal or possibly even sweet person. Real assholes don't have these thoughts, I'm an asshole. They have this, oh, you showed him, yeah, that was a good thing to do, yeah. That's how real assholes think about themselves, So try that and witness weather this storm that will come. You probably will cry or get angry, get scared. Oh, it's so scary to go against your own mind. So scary. What can be scarier? Nothing threatens you at all, but it's so scary. Oh, I'm disoriented. I didn't say I'm sorry. Oh. So take some time, sit down, close your eyes. Spend time with it. But just make baby steps, make little steps. So practice is important. But also in life, you can make steps to embody the direction of your practice, to embody the insights that you're receiving, and this requires changes of the behavior, change of old patterns, and that we change old patterns and behavior. It is never pleasant. The mind is always say, "What are we doing? What are you doing? What are you going to do without me? Without me? Oh, you're going to be dead. You're going to be dead in 2 years. You're going to be dead in 2 years. You're not going to apologize to someone, and they're going to kill you. They're going to kill you. I swear to you."
Okay. And I guess if I was like truly like wrong someone, I could always apologize.
Well, they will also make it known, Make small steps first. So the situations in which already you suspect, if you suspect that you're apologizing out of place, then you're starting to see this automatic habit of supplication. And so in these situations, at least, if your intuition is telling you, oh, there's something wrong, I'm like playing out something here, it's kind of, if you catch it in time, like, okay, take a breath, say to yourself at least, let's take a pause at least before apologizing, like 10 seconds pause, 2 seconds pause, 30 seconds pause. It's like if you really wrong someone and you come back and apologize after 5 minutes and you say, you know what, like I said this 5 minutes ago, I'm sorry. It's not gonna cheapen anything. So don't be too quick to apologize. Right? So take this pause, and then maybe what you're observing during this pause is that the mind is like starting to say, okay, so now you need to take a little bit more time, watch all of these things happen, and then see the clarity that emerges afterwards. So give yourself some time, and then it will become easier with time, and then you'll start seeing more and more where you don't have to apologize at all. You didn't say I'm sorry.
I wasn't about to.
I'm sorry for my questions.
Sorry for not saying sorry.
All right. So thank you. Okay, yes. Mm.
How do you manage to exist within the society where everybody is, I don't want to say like a bad person, right? But they're all not doing the self-work, so they're all kind of doing the same mistakes over and over and over again. And then you have to see people that you care about do those same mistakes because they don't love themselves. And then you're sitting there and you can't force them to be like, open your eyes, you have to love yourself and this and this and that. How do you exist? It's exhausting, isn't it?
Who's you?
Me.
It is exhausting, yes. But you see, there's a part of your suffering which is having been conditioned by all those people, which you have not yet, of course, fully explored and seen. There's a part of your suffering which is being continuously triggered by interactions with those people. And this also, of course, has not yet been transcended or experienced in full measure. So that's why it is exhausting. And then also, there's a part of your suffering which thinks, which is coming from you wanting to change those people, or wanting them to be different, or wanting to help them, or wanting them to do the same work that you do. And that is also quite difficult. So for as long as this journey continues, it can get painful, it can be exhausting, even enough to change yourself to in a sufficient, accepted yourself, transformed yourself, shall we say. So changing yourself happens through accepting yourself. Even as you transform yourself to sufficient measure, there's still a desire to help and other people to do the same, and that also can be exhausting in itself. So it is an exhausting process, because actually, strictly speaking, the suffering cannot be transcended. Suffering is, strictly speaking, exhausted. The mind, enlightenment is the exhaustion of the mind. It is the process in which the mind have had finally, and it's a slow process, but it's a process that where the mind and have had finally all of the sufferings, and it's completely exhausted, completely satisfied all of its yearnings to experience all this self-created stuff. Or the other way to talk about it is that when all of the unconscious material has been exhausted, so it's exhausting. It's difficult for the body. Because it's emotional, but there is no other way that leads to a permanent peace and contentment, but other than to feel it and surrender to it, because you strictly speaking have no choice. There is no button, there is no like magic solution to this problem. You see? So the question, how do I exist in this society, is not really a question. You're not really asking me a question. You're simply complaining, because if you're asking how, like, it's not that there's something wrong with complaining, but when you're asking how do I exist in such society, like meaning like, how as in mechanism, right? Then I should be asking you the question, well, how? Like, tell me how. You're telling me that all of this is happening in you, and I believe you, and yet you're still alive, you're still breathing. This is how. You know, you are much stronger than you think. So if you ask, like, is it possible to exist and live this life being exposed to all of those emotional things? And then, of course, and you're an example of it. Is it also difficult? Yes. All right. Well, thank you for the talk. Thank you for wonderful questions, everybody.